Welcome to Catskill Weiss Schwarz. Today we will be doing a brief video with a ban list update that just happened this morning that Bushiroad released. That might seem early to a lot of people, considering we just got one a month ago, which only took effect a few days ago, and the fact that we haven't actually started the new regional season, and the fact that nothing new has actually come out yet. But they dropped a new ban list on us. It only hits Overlord. It adds a couple new cards to the choice list that we'll look at in a minute. Their reasoning was that we are about to get a new set, and so they're doing this hit. They also said that Overlord made up of 13% of the representation at Worlds, though they acknowledged that it did not get a single top 8. This was a very much a surprise hit. I'm not saying it's not a hit that's needed on the deck. I think, my biases against Overlord might be showing because I think it's just not fun to play against. And at the end of the day, you should be having fun when you're playing this game. And it's been around for a good long while now. Overlord Set 2 did come out in the fall of 2023 or 2022. It's one of the two, I forget. But it's been around the block for a while. It's had its time in the sun. And so this morning on their socials, they just dropped a new ban list, and yeah, it is what it is. Let's see what the list actually looks like. So here is the list. Takes effect on starting May 8th. Takes effect starting May 22nd. They announced it today, May 8th, Friday, May 8th. So it'll take effect in a couple of weeks. The list still has the 1/1 Ainz at 1 copy. We'll get to why that is a mistake later. And then before we had a choice 1 of 2 list, between the first 2 cards pictured in the choice list, which was that 1/0 Shaltir and the 2/1 Yuri. The Shaltir being part of a whole Brides package that saw a ton of play when Ainz Goats Overlord first became a thing. And then there was a choice list, and no one seems to really, for the most part, be picking that package over the Yuri, because before it was just a choice between that and the Yuri. The Yuri is a phenomenal card. It's a 2/1 that is on play. You draw 2, ditch 2, and if you have 4 or more other characters, you could stock something from your waiting room, stock a character. Really great to help you dig for your bar climaxes, which are desperately needed. It's really important to be looping your combo. It's in a good color. It's sort of just a great option to have in a lot of Overlord decks that are running green. However, Bushiroad decided to add 3 new cards to the choice list. They added the level 3 bar Ainz combo, the infamous Ainz that everyone mostly hates. They added, strangely, the Fumio, and they also added the rest counter. Now, there were a whole bunch of people who thought they were. I don't want to knock on anyone. Bushiroad does a lot of things wrong. In the picture, Bushiroad only put the 2/1 rest counter that was the reprint version when set 2 came out, and they dropped this list very early in the morning. They don't just post a picture. For anyone unfamiliar with it, they don't just post a picture of the ban list and call it a day. There is a section on their website where they list the actual card code, and it's a little more detailed than just some pictures. People were saying that at first they did not have the original print version of the 2/1 rest counter listed because it has a different name, but it's exactly the same card. It's also on an aura, but it's the same card, same effect, just has a different name, which meant technically you could play 8 copies of it. So of course the comments on the Facebook post were all, Bushiroad, this one exists, did you forget, yada yada yada. Valid concern, I'm not saying that. However, by the time that I actually saw the list at around 8:30 this morning, it looks like they posted it around 6ish maybe. By the time I actually saw the list and went to that portion that details the cards a little bit more than just the pictures that they show, they had updated it to show that the other the original one is on it as well. So You cannot play the rest counter, period. You can't try to be cheeky and go play the original rest counter. Yes, that was clearly a mistake on Bushiroad's part. I'm sure they were aware of the original printing of it when they made the list. They just forgot to add it to the list. The last time they made a ban list a month ago, they also forgot to include that Data Live still had its finisher restricted to 2 copies, but that did not mean that it was not still restricted to 2 copies. They just forgot to include it. They make mistakes like that all the time. I'm not saying they shouldn't have made the mistake. They shouldn't have made the mistake. It's Bushiroad. But just, when something seems really obvious like that, they weren't trying to suddenly drive up the market price for the old printing. And I don't know why so many people in the comments on various socials seemed to think Bushiroad did that on purpose when, Bushiroad clearly doesn't have a handle on what they're doing most of the time. But anyway, so yeah, we have 3 new cards added to this choice list. I think this is really strange overall, to be honest. For anyone, yesterday I posted a video that was a tier list video. This was before the new ban list, obviously, that happened just this morning. And in that video, which was like a 4-hour video that I spent a lot of time on and now needs to be changed. But anyway, in that I put that the Bar Goats Overlord was an A tier. I no longer think that is the case. I think too much is hit now, and I think this version of Overlord, it's early to say. It's hard to say exactly where it would land right now. I have my gut reaction to it, but we're going to need to see how things play out. My gut reaction tells me that Overlord just dropped a ton. I absolutely do not think it is an A tier anymore. I don't even think it's in B tier anymore. I put a little note in my video from yesterday in the description of it that I think that this version of Overlord drops to C tier, and I specifically said lower C tier. A part of me is wondering if that is being generous. Maybe I'll be wrong and, Overlord will still top a lot. But, at a certain point, when you have 6 cards on a ban list and honestly, the Aura Fumio could be used in anything, and same with the rest count. A lot of these cards are generic, but no version of Overlord tops except Bar Goats. I think that when you have a ban list where there are 6 cards on it that are specifically targeted towards one deck, how long can they keep adding to it before that deck just doesn't do anything anymore? Overlord's been hit twice over the time of its existence in set 2, recently with the last hit we got, which some people argued it was actually a buff to it based on the way they did the hits. I think that at this point, the consistency of Overlord just keeps taking hits, and I've talked to death on this channel about what it means when a set's consistency is hit, especially when that consistency revolves around that deck's endgame, how important that is, or through its resource generation. With this hit, it's sort of both. The level 2 Yuri was incredibly important. I have only played the Bar Goats deck in the simulator because I hate the deck. It's not fun to play. But I played a lot of Overlord outside of that, including stuff from set 2. I have played 8 variations of 8 Door. I've played a little bit of Choice. I've done 8 Standby. I've done Door Standby. I have splashed green into every single deck just so I could splash in that Yuri because I think that Yuri is phenomenal. And of course, I also made sure I had green splashed in so that I could play the Fumio. And of course, in every single version, I also play the rest counter because if you have an open slot, why would you not play the rest counter? Because it is just such a good card. So I am a little sad that 4 of these cards arguably are, including the Sheltier Bride package thing, which I don't really care for, but some people might at this point. 4 of these cards are generic cards that aren't directly a part of the Bar Goats deck. And what I mean by that is that, the 1/1 that's pictured here, that card was designed to work with the level 3 Ainz combo. Its sole purpose in life is to make the Ainz combo better. The other cards, the Sheltier, the Yuri, the Fumio, the rest counter, they work really well in the Ainz deck, but they weren't designed to make that deck better. They just happen to work really well in that deck. They could be used and often were used in other decks. Maybe the Bride package, not so much, but the other three cards, absolutely. I've seen other people that aren't on the Goats Ainz deck that were playing the Yuri, the Fumio, and the Rest Counter. So I am a little disappointed that now I have to choose. I have to basically take two cards out of every other Overlord deck that I have, and decide between the Fumio Rest Counter or the Yuri. That is kind of disappointing to me. I personally think they should have just banned the 1/1. I don't know why they're stringing it along. It's like Bushiroad decided they wanted to kill the Ainz deck, but they didn't want to do it cleanly or slowly. They really just wanted to drag it out, which is just sort of cruel. And, it's unfair to anyone who has to watch, like maybe other Overlord players who like playing the Yuri, the Fumio, or the Rest Counter. And while those cards don't make or break a deck, the thing is that until we get not the set that's coming out, the extra booster, which is a good set overall, but it's a good set for utility reasons and stuff like that. It's not an overpowered set or anything. Overlord, until we get the premium booster, I don't think it's going to be like a meta powerhouse again or anything like that. I don't think anything currently existing within the first two sets of Overlord or within the extra booster that we're about to get next week is really so meta threatening or anything like that you needed to have a list where you had to make sure that any other version of Overlord can't play the Fumio, the Rest Counter, or the Yuri, or the Bride's package, I guess. So I think I can't imagine they did it on purpose where they wanted to preemptively hit all of these other Overlord decks because those other Overlord decks weren't going to do anything to begin with. I even put the new Age Door Ainz deck, I think lower in B tier when I made my tier list video that came out yesterday. That isn't out yet, but I have tested it on the simulator a lot, and it's a very consistent 1k1 deck, and it does some cool things. I need to sort of think about, that was a 1k1 deck that did some really cool stuff, and it had really great door synergy, and that made the deck very consistent. But I was playing the decompression tool of the Fumio, I was playing the defensive Rest Counter, and I was playing the consistency tool of the Yuri. I'd have to go and test the deck with just one of those and see how it does. I'm sure I'm going to take out the Fumio because I would use the Fumio the least out of those three cards. I'll probably just stick with the Yuri most likely, but who's to say? At the end of the day, it is just a little disappointing that they hit the deck, they hit Overlord, the GOATS version of Overlord, in the way that they did, because it just negatively affects other decks that didn't need to be hit. There is no way that the Door Ainz deck was really going to be like so dominant or anything like that. Just ban the 1/1. That's what they should have done. But that's not what they did, so we have to deal with reality. I think with this new choice 1 of 5 list, I do think that is effectively the nail in the coffin on the GOATS deck as we know it. I think it's just been hit too many times now. The fact that now you're basically playing your one copy of the 1/1, and the only other card in this list that you are playing would be the level 3 Ainz combo and nothing else. I think it's just too much at a certain point. You have no decompression whatsoever now. You have no defensive options. I will say all the times I've played against Overlord, I am pretty sure I have never once been Fumioed, but I'm 99% sure that every version of Overlord, of the GOATS version that I've played against, was playing the Fumio. What I will say though is that rest counter has always been a very prominent thing that I've always had to be very, very mindful of. And it's been used against me a couple times when I just couldn't play around it. And I remember one game I wanted them to waste all of their stock, so I baited them into using it. But still, it was something that I was always counting their stock. Did they have the enough stock to use it? And if they did, suddenly the whole game shifted, and I had to be very careful. Without that, now they lose their biggest defensive option. Without the 2/1 Yuri, they lose so much consistency at level 2 with drawing into more bars and, you know, that sort of thing, which was the biggest thing that she did, either to draw you into bars, draw you into another climax so that you could climax swap, whatever it was. At worst, you just got a big body on board for free that, just cost you one card in hand. I think it's just too much at this point. I would put Overlord, this version of Overlord, lower C tier. Maybe you could argue it could be lower. I think it's hard to argue that it's higher because thinking back on what I just put in my C tier list, in my tier list video, almost everything is vastly more consistent than this version of Overlord. And even if it can't blow up the board the way Ainz can, or heal as much as Ainz can, or just be as much of a nuisance as Ainz can. It is so much harder now for Ainz to be that nuisance. It is harder for them to continuously be that nuisance throughout the course of the game. Plus, the fact that no one has to worry about rest counter anymore, I think is actually a really big deal. Even if it's something that the Overlord player didn't always have enough stock to use, it wasn't unreasonable to think that they could have it. So it is, it's fine. I still wish that they had just banned the 1/1 so that my other Overlord decks wouldn't suffer needlessly, because frankly, I don't think any other version of Overlord that we currently have in English would honestly be like some threat that deserves to be on a ban list, because it has these other tools available to it. The deck, those other versions certainly get worse. I don't think you can argue that they get better with this. The only thing that I would argue gets better because of this list that is Overlord would be like 8 standby, or at least 4 standby Overlord. We have the Albedo from set 2, which is a card that I really, really like. That card turns off auto damage. And a big weakness that that deck has was that if it gets removed, that is a problem. And the Ainz was a very natural counter to that deck. I am not saying that that deck didn't top because Ainz existed. That deck just had some issues that don't really get rectified until the premium booster, to be honest. But I think when it first came out and the game was a little bit different, I think that it would have done a tad better than it did, which was it did absolutely nothing. It would have done a tiny bit better. But the set that it came out in had an extremely natural counter to it. I still think Ace Standby Overlord doesn't really get much better in the premium booster we're about to get. In the extra booster we're about to get, we really need the premium booster. And at that point, 8 Standby Overlord is going to become a very, very big deck. But still, there are other 1k1 decks that are perfectly fine. We never see them top because they're nothing special, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are bad. We have perfectly fine standard combos that just deal normal amounts of damage for a reasonable cost. There's just nothing broken about them, so I've never really talked about them too much. And the extra booster does have a couple of other combos coming out aside from the new 3/2 Door Ainz, and all of those just sort of take a hit by having this restriction set up the way that it is set up. If you want to argue that rest counters are sort of unfair and a deck shouldn't have them to begin with, I could understand that. I'm not necessarily a fan of them. I like when a set that I'm playing has it, and I will absolutely play it. I'm not going to not play it just based off of principle. It does seem a little unfair that so few sets get them, so when a set does get it, they kind of automatically just get a little bit better, just because they do have that to threaten. Most sets really don't get them, but still, this list is what it is. I don't dislike that this version of Overlord is going to pretty much be dead, as what my very early thoughts are, or if it's not dead, I don't know what is worse than being on life support but still above being dead, but I think that is where this version of Overlord is currently living. It's technically not dead, but I can't, if I was a doctor, I couldn't even say that this is on life support because it seems worse than that. Um, we'll see what happens. I think the issue is that you technically don't need any of the pieces that are on this choice list, aside from the level 3 Ainz combo, obviously. You don't need the other 4 pieces on the choice list to actually do what Ainz wants to do. None of them directly have anything to do with the Ainz. The issue comes down to consistency. The issue comes down to having, a defensive option. But I've said it a lot. When you go to a regional, you need to bring a deck with you that can consistently, almost any modern deck can beat the best decks in the format. That just by the nature of Weiss. As long as you know what you're doing, and you have a competent deck, it's not even like that. It's easy to imagine that any modern thing really can be like Oshinoko or Bane Dream, because it's just not that difficult. The issue is doing it consistently over the course of a long tournament. You have to be able to, you have to go into it assuming that if you win round one and round one you get paired up with like absolutely anything, once you get past that, if you keep winning, you are more likely to be placed up. You're going to be paired against other people who are consistently winning. And the people who are more likely to be consistently winning are the people that are running the best or the better decks of the format. And they are the best decks for a reason. They probably are the most explosive. They might have the best defensive tools. Something like Nikkei may not be explosive, but it's fantastic at resource generation, plus being a great defensive deck. But they're all very, very consistent. So as long as your deck is consistent, you can absolutely take it to a regional, and you could expect to do well and beat things like Oshinoko and Bane Dream and yada 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 over the course of the tournament. The problem really just comes down to replicating that throughout the entire tournament, because the way that Top Cut is in Weiss, most often at most tournaments, especially the ones I've been to, and I know this very well personally, that if it's a 7 or an 8 round tournament, being X2 at the end of all of those rounds, so you got 5 wins, 2 losses, or 6 wins, 2 losses, you are probably not getting into Top Cut. It's been very rare that, for anyone who's unfamiliar, Bushiroad used to have just top 8. It was just a straight top 8. Then they changed it to where Top Cut could be top 8, it could be top 16, it could be top 32. It all depended on attendance. However, Bushiroad often has caps on the amount of people that could enter. So between the fact that sometimes even if there isn't, if there's a venue that is large enough to host enough Weiss players to make it so that there is a top 32 cup, maybe not enough people show up. Other times Bushiroad has a cap so that it can't even get to the requisite number of players to do that anyway. But the point is that even if you are X2 at a regional, you probably more often than not don't actually make it to Top Cut. It does depend. I'm not saying no X2s make it in, but I have gone X2 at so many regionals by now, and I have always been 2-3 slots away from actually making it. But the last regional I went to was Philly in March, and I was also X2 at that one, and I was like 30 slots away from making it into top 16, despite there were a whole bunch of X2s at that one. But I've also been X2, and I was really like 2 or 3 slots away, and that's happened so many times. My point is that there's very little room for any sort of misstep at a Weiss regional. It's not as forgiving as some other card games are when it comes to getting into Top Cut, mostly because top 32s very rarely actually happen with Weiss so far. So you basically need to be top 16, and at that point you're going to have maybe some undefeated, then you're going to have a bunch of X1s, and then some X2s will sneak in there. So when you go to a regional, you need to really be picking something that maximizes how consistently you can just perform, and your deck will just, be able to do what it needs to do. Take away consistency, is it still possible? Sure, but every round increases the chances that your deck is just not going to work, or something's just going to go wrong, or your deck will work, but your opponent just canceled maybe a bit more than average, or, everything went fine and it was a pretty even game, but at the end of the day, someone still has to win. Overlord, from the beginning of this Ainz Goat deck, sometimes it already had a problem where it could just lose to itself. Um, it was when it was full power, it was still a great deck, but a weakness was that it could just lose to itself if things just didn't go the right way, and your opponent didn't have to really do anything to make that happen. I've played against it enough times to know that very often my wins weren't because I outplayed my Overlord opponent. It was because like they just couldn't loop the combo enough or get all the different pieces that it needed. And so I was able to win just because they couldn't maximize their deck. Um, I think now that we have 6 cards targeted at this one deck, um, can you realistically expect to just win round after round after round and maybe allow yourself a single loss if you want to sort of guarantee that you're getting into like top 16 at a regional? When we're about to go into teams regionals, and yes, if you lose, you can rely on your teammates to pick up the slack a little bit, but I don't know how many teams are going to, really want a deck on their third slot that is just facing such an uphill battle in terms of consistency now. Um, you probably just want to go for something more consistent and just do that, I guess. Yeah, not much more to say about this. Should have just banned the 1/1. We don't need this choice 5, but I cannot argue that the choice 5, in addition to limiting the 1/1 to one copy, will not hinder the deck. It absolutely will hinder it to the point where I think like if you are playing this still at a local or a regional level, it's because you just really like Ainz or you really like Bar, you really like Overlord. Um, at but to be honest, like unless you just like really blowing up your opponent's board and healing a lot, there are so many other versions of Overlord that have Ainz in them or have bar combos in them. Excuse me. That I don't see why you wouldn't just be playing one of those other versions. Um, because they're just so much more consistent and more fun. You'll have more fun playing them, and your opponents will have more fun playing against you when they see you are not playing the Goats version of Overlord. Because I don't think many people have sat across from at a regional and jumped for joy. More often than not, it's sort of like a groan because it's just not fun to play against. At the very least, I think this list does largely fix that problem. I do expect the representation of this to go down going forward as we go into the next regional season. I just wish that there wasn't as much friendly fire on other Overlord decks as what my guess is unintended consequence of trying to kill the Goats list. But let me know what you guys think of this, how you think it affects Overlord. Am I wrong with putting this into low C tier, possibly lower, and you think it's still a very viable B tier or higher deck? Let me know if you think that, and let me know how you think this affects other Overlord decks, considering in just 1 week we have a brand new Overlord set coming out that has all sorts of cool, interesting goodies to add to Overlord decks. Until next time, this has been Catskill Weiss Schwarz. Thank you for watching.